All right, guys, the Iceman here on this Saturday morning on the Jeffrey Rose YouTube channel. Now, this video today is going to be about the good old days. It's a Crockett Promotions video. Um, it's all about the history of the Jim Crockett Promotions back in the old NWA days. And if you didn't know much about what went on back then, this is an excellent video to watch. My nephew Matt had this video, and I borrowed it from him. Actually, no, he made me a copy of it, and I just watched it this morning. I knew a lot about the NWA because I was watching a lot of it back then, but there's a lot I learned about it as well. Um, it's basically like the rise and the fall of the Crockett Promotions, and there was just a lot of things that you know you didn't know, and it was such a great promotion. Jim Crockett Sr., who was one of the most honest guys in the world of professional wrestling. He took care of all his superstars, all his wrestlers. Um, he did what he needed to do. He paid them in cash back in the day. But he passed away in 1973, and he had three other sons. And the two prominent names that we all know of is Jim Crockett Sr. and David Crockett. He had a third son and a daughter. And he didn't leave the company to run um, with his sons. He left it to an outsider that he trusted that knew more about the business aspect of NWA. But after it was taken over by Jim Crockett Jr., and things started to flourish. I mean, Dusty Rhodes was a big part in Crockett Promotions. He was a booker as well as a wrestler. Um, Dusty Rhodes just come up with some great ideas. He put together some great matches. He was involved in some great matches. He came up with the concept of Starcade in 1983. He came up with the concept of the Great American Bash. Um, so yeah, Dusty Rhodes was a real huge part in the NWA and the, the how it all went. I mean, their success. I mean, they were on top of the mountain for so long. They controlled Southern wrestling in the Greensboro, Charlotte, North Carolina area. Um, they eventually got control of Georgia, Florida. They expanded. Ole Anderson um, was booking in two different territories, which it became a bit too much for him, and he sort of knew it was the wrong thing to do, but he kept on doing it. But in any event, um, any wrestler that was a wrestler, that wanted to be well known, wanted to go to the Crockett's. I mean, that was the place to be for a very, very long period of time. The old WWF, um, up in the New York area, you know, they saw this going on. And when Vince McMahon, Vincent Kennedy McMahon took over, he saw what was going on and he wanted to take a big part in this as well. And I'd have to say that, Vince McMahon uh, was very, very devious in his role in all of this. And I'll get to that in a few moments. But yeah, the Crockett promotions just flourished. And a lot of it had to do with Dusty Rhodes as the booker. Um, and then Ole Anderson, again, like I said, running two promotions, two territories, I should say. And Arn Anderson one day just came up with the concept of an apocalypse. Got together a four-member group of guys, and that's eventually how they became the Horsemen. Four heel guys that everybody wanted to get a piece of, and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's how the Four Horsemen really became huge as such a huge stable. And none other than their leader, other than Ric Flair. And a lot of people don't understand this too. Back in I think it was 1977 when the the plane had crashed, going from I believe it was Charlotte to Wilmingham, I think it was. Um, David Crockett was on that plane, Ric Flair, and three or four other members. And Ric Flair injured his back. I believe he broke his back. But he worked hard to come back. And then there was a new man on the block that came in that Dusty Rhodes brought in with Wahoo McDaniels. Wahoo McDaniels was a very huge part of the Crockett Promotions because he's the one who saw Ric Flair and brought him in. But they brought in Ricky Steamboat, a 24-year-old kid, and him and Ric Flair just went at it right away. And a lot of people don't realize that Flair and Steamboat wrestled in 1977, and they just gelled. And of course, they had their matches, even 10 years later. But yeah, this was a great documentary to watch. Um, like I said, Dusty Rhodes came up with the concept of Starrcade in 1983, and that was the first major wrestling, you know, major event that wasn't in an, that was in an arena, but it was actually aired on like closed circuit TV or pay-per-view, so to speak. And a few years later in 1986, it was after WrestleMania was formed because and people were saying that TNA steals ideas from the WWE. Look what Vince did. He got the idea of WrestleMania from the Crockett's in Starrcade. And he got to the point where after he created WrestleMania um, and whatnot, he got to the point where he told the cable companies, he gave them an ultimatum. This was in 1986. Starrcade was going to be in Chicago. And he told the cable companies, "You're not airing them, and airing us. So it's either them or us because we'll back out." And the cable companies chose Vince McMahon because he had more pay-per-views on that particular cable company at the time. And that's just how devious Vince McMahon was. It was a business, it's competitiveness. I understand, but when you do something like that, you show that you have fear in your competition. And Vince McMahon had every right to have fear in his competition because the Crockett Promotions were the biggest thing going. They had all the superstars in the world. And little by little, Vince started saying, "Hey, I'll pay you more. I'll make you a bigger star. I'll take you away from all the group of superstars where you're probably not going to be as big as you want to be. And I'll bring you to my promotion and I'll bring you right up the ladder right away." And that's how Vince started playing his little chess game with the Crockett promotion. And he did take a number of wrestlers away. Um, but it didn't really hurt the Crockett promotion as much as Vince wanted it to. I think the Crockett promotion hurt themselves because they got so big, they got such swelled heads, they were spending so much money, they got two jets, they were flying people back and forth and whatnot. And it got to the point where they didn't realize, they spent $20 million, but they only got back 18, or they spent 24 and they only got back 20. And they weren't realize what was going on at this point because they were doing so great. I mean, ratings were syndicated everywhere. And really, it wasn't until they got the contract with TBS. And this was the thing that really made them even bigger because TBS, it was expanded throughout the United States to major areas. And once that happened, because the NWA was on TBS, TBS started expanding their shows, their live shows, to those areas where people got to watch them. So people knew who they were. So they started selling out events everywhere. And they were just living the dream. But like I said, they were spending more money than they were getting in. And, they even talked about Magnum TA, how he he was going to be the next person to take over Ric Flair's, you know, spot, and until he had that tragic car accident and he was paralyzed. He was lucky he's able to walk to this day, but that sort of took the spotlight away. And like I said, until years later, when Sting came into the spotlight, then it was Sting. But if you really don't have a clue about how wrestling was in the past, check out The Good Old Days by the Crockett Promotions. It's an excellent DVD. It tells you a lot about how they started, how big they got, the competition they had. And like I said, Vince McMahon is no angel because, even to this day, we all know what he did. And he was even doing it back then. So, and again, when it comes to TNA guys, and you're saying they're copying the WWE, look back in history and look what Vince McMahon has copied and where he's gotten his ideas from. Because a lot of the ideas that have made him millions and millions of dollars, those ideas came elsewhere. Peace out, everybody. Have a great Saturday. Bound for Glory tomorrow night. I will have a Bound for Glory review tomorrow night. See y'all soon.